Welcome back to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today we have host Ashley Colby. Stephen Morris is also online with us, as well as myself. And our guest, I think for most of our audience, needs no introduction. I think you've been, your writing has been very influential for many of us. And that is JMG, John Michael Greer. How are you, sir? Thank you
I'm
for
doing
being
very well. Thank you. And thank you very much for having me on. It's always entertaining to have a chance to talk with people who don't have to be convinced that maybe there's something going a little wrong with the grand upward march of progress, blah, blah, blah. So I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Yeah, we don't need to be convinced. We're, the whole idea behind Doomer Optimism is, in order to be optimistic in any real sense of the word, you have to metabolize the doom, right? And
Yeah.
it's a little bit dramatic, it's just kind of fun to be a little dramatic about it. But
we live in dramatic times. So
we do. Well, so why don't we give you a chance to introduce yourself in your own words, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. As the man said, I'm John Michael Greer. I've been a writer, blogger, general gadfly, and pain in the rump to those with unfortunately too rigid ideas for a very long time now. For many years, for 12 years, something like that, I ran a blog called the Archdruid Report, which reported on peak oil and the twilight of industrial civilization generally. These days, I'm on another blog called Ecosophia. Do not read either one of them if you want to have all of your ideas patted on their pointy little heads and agreed with. And I write lots of books. I write lots of blog posts. I do various other things in my spare time. It's one of those. I live in Rhode Island these days. That's kind of me.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I thought that I would start just to kind of set the stage for the conversation. I was rereading The Long Descent, your book, and I found this quote that was such a perfect explanation of what we're doing here on this podcast that I figured I'd just read it out loud to get us started. So the quote goes, it's on page 151. The one question is whether enough people will embrace the challenge of rebuilding civil society in time to make a difference on a community scale, or whether, as in the declining years of so many past empires, it will be left up to small groups on the fringes of society to embrace a path of mutual aid and preserve today's legacies for the future. So, just to get us started, I mean, maybe you can unpack that a little bit. We're pretty interested in this intersection of collapse, failure, and what arises out of it, and the diversity of that, and then, basically to try to give people a landscape of what kind of things they should be thinking about or preparing for is the idea, although that sure. Can mean literally rebuilding entire institutions and society, so it's an extremely diverse range of things.
It's a very diverse problem. Well, basically, we can start with the fact that industrial society is falling. Not is going to fall, please note. Is falling. We've actually been in decline since the 1970s. It's been papered over in various ways, and all kinds of distractions have been waved around. Hey, look at this technological gimmick. Stare at that and pretend. Maybe it'll help you pretend that your standard of living hasn't dropped by 10% over the last decade. We are in a society in decline. It's not a matter of when it'll happen. It's a matter of how bad it will get, how soon. I think many of us have recently experienced grocery store shelves and other store shelves with big gaps on them. We've noticed problems in the supply chain. We have little bitty problems with public health. All the things that normally happen when a civilization is going to bits. Now, the question that I asked in that quote, and I should praise myself here, right? It's a great quote. But the question is, to what extent is industrial society prepared to deal with this reality, and to what extent are people going to spend their time staring at screens, gazing at imaginary tomorrowlands while drool puddles in their lap? Unfortunately, so far, since the publication of that book, right up to the present time, the answer has been very, very few. even among those people who claim that they are aware of the predicament we're in, who claim that they understand blah 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 blah, then they get back into their SUV and drive 3 blocks to the grocery store. They just go on with their lives. That is not going to cut it. The question, there's this marvelous poem by Rainier Maria Rilke, the German poet, where it ends up he's confronting this Greek statue of Apollo, and what the statue is saying to him, not in so many words, but the impact that it has on him is simply the words "Du musst dein Leben ändern," you must change your life. And that's the question we face. How many people are willing to change their lives? How many people are willing to to use a slogan that I've used repeatedly, are willing to collapse now and avoid the rush, to make changes before they're necessary so you can land on your feet as various items of industrial society drop out from beneath you? That's the question. Fortunately, there are people who are making those changes. There are people who are cutting back on their energy usage, who are learning ways of doing things that don't depend on having a gargantuan industrial technostructure to take care of them, who are making various adjustments to deal with this sooner than they absolutely have to. That's crucial. There aren't many of them yet. So the answer to the question is very clearly, at this point, unless something changes, it's going to be small groups on the fringes of society. The question now is, how many of those can we encourage to come into existence? Can they network, or is it just going to be little groups here and there that are working pretty much all by themselves? And that's the question that hasn't been answered yet.
Yeah, I kind of see, besides just a podcast, what we're trying to do on Doomer Optimism. So we're active on social media like Twitter and stuff, but really what we're trying to do is network, people across the world who have a similar sensibility, who do want to collapse now and avoid the rush, who want to localize their dependencies, learn how to maybe grow food or capture energy in ways that don't depend on the industrial grid. Maybe I think before we go further, your notion of catabolic collapse, I think, is a really good summary of why industrial civilization is going the way it does. And when we actually posted on Twitter that we were having this conversation with you, and one of the questions we had was, we'll ask them about fusion energy or geothermal. If you think that there's any chance that catabolic collapse could be forestalled a few decades or a century.
Okay.
So feel free to take that wherever you want.
Point number one. Again, it's not when collapse is happening. We are already in the process. So we kind of have had, would have had to get this started a long time ago. Fusion power is one of many things that people always bring up. And there's a large industry in the physics community that's dedicated to flushing vast amounts of money down a collection of high-tech rat holes, claiming that they're going to solve the fusion problem. There was an announcement just the other day. The the Joint European Torus in England had managed to produce in a 5-second burst of fusion enough heat that if it was all captured and turned into usable energy, it could have powered one house for a day. And the media is out there yelling, look, this proves that fusion power is functional, blah, blah, blah. What they didn't mention is, first of all, they had to shut it off after 5 seconds. Partly it collapsed after 5 seconds, but partly they're going to have to take the whole machine down and replace it because the pressures and temperatures they've been using have damaged it too greatly to keep using. They've done several second bursts, okay? So how are they going to be running this 24/7? They didn't say. How are they going to capture that outburst of heat? Because, just stray heat doesn't provide power. It doesn't provide the things that people need energy. They're not saying. It's a stunt. And like most of the high-tech stunts these days, it is a white elephant of the classic example. You can do it after a fashion if you're willing to flush billions of dollars down a rat hole. Nuclear power, all nuclear power is the same way. every fission power technology is cheap and clean and efficient and affordable until it's actually built. And then it turns out to be another dog like the others. So I'm expecting any minute now there will be some new fission reactor style, and everyone will be going, "Ooh, this will save us." Another $50 billion will go down that rat hole, and it will turn out to be overpriced and underperforming like all the others. Geothermal, here again. When I was in high school, in the late 1970s, I was in the debate club. And I don't know how they do it more recently, but back in those days, they would have a topic for the year's school debate clubs. And I think it was 77, 78, or 78, 79, one or the other. The topic du jour was the energy crisis. And geothermal got hashed and rehashed and rehashed. And all the same arguments that are being used for it now were used back then. And they all fell over flat for the same reason. It's too diffuse. Now, energy concentration. This is a concept many people don't get. You get the idea. You still hear these claims that, enough sun falls on, X area of land to power all of industrial civilization, blah, blah, blah. No doubt. Okay. Equally, there's an enormous amount of gold in seawater. Try extracting it at a competitive price. You can't do it. It costs more than it's worth. In the same way, if you had one hand held out so that the sun was shining on it and another hand in a bucket of burning gasoline, you'd notice the difference in temperature. That's energy concentration. The burning gasoline can power is that has enough energy concentrated in it that by burning gasoline in an engine, you can drive machines, you can do things like that. Sunlight, you have to concentrate it first. Second law of thermodynamics, when you concentrate energy, you lose some. Every transformation of energy loses energy. That's the law of entropy. And so that's why all of these gimmicks to power the world using solar power, which, by the way, have been going on for more than a century, actually more than a century and a half at this point, they don't work because sunlight's too diffuse. We're $96 million miles away from the power plant, and a lot of power gets lost from point A to point B. So we're in this situation. People keep on coming up with, here's this energy resource. Here's this. Well, no, none of the things they're coming up with have the combination of concentration, abundance, and fungibility, which means you can use it for many different purposes. That combination that petroleum has, that coal has, that natural gas has, that made industrial civilization possible. Okay. Now, that's all one big lump of why the latest fusion pipe dream or the latest geothermal pipe dream or the latest solar pipe dream are not going to do the job. The other thing is that it's a complete misunderstanding of catabolic collapse. And I know a lot of people have taken to using the word, and I don't think most of them have actually read my paper on the subject or any of the discussions of the subject in my book. I probably need to do a blog post on it sometime soon to try to break through. Catabolic collapse is not just a way of saying, everything falls to bits. It's a specific theory. The way catabolic collapse works is very simple. Societies build more stuff than they have the resources to maintain. It's like, if imagine that you have, imagine that you win the lottery, okay? And you win the lottery and you decide you're going to build this huge mansion up on a hill, okay? And you have enough money to build the mansion. You build the mansion, okay? And it uses up all the money. Now, how are you going to maintain it? How are you going to pay the property taxes? How are you going to pay the power bills, the heat bills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Pretty soon, your big house on a hill is falling apart, and you've had to leave for a cheap apartment somewhere because your salary won't, whatever income you're making, won't pay the upkeep costs. In short form, that's what happens to civilizations. They build more capital than they can maintain. And that's catabolic collapse is what happens when the maintenance budget runs too far below, and all this structure, all this stuff has to be let go to ruin. Okay, now that I've ranted at you for a while.
Yeah, I was just actually reading your original paper on Catabolic Collapse a few days ago, so I'm a little late
Thank
to
you.
the party, but I'm trying to get caught up.
No,
And what I
that's
really
fine.
like about it,
You've read it at all. I'm happy about that.
I mean, to be fair, some of it I kind of glazed over with all of the, the symbols and, getting into the mathematics, but I think I got it. But what I really loved about it is you're relating it to kind of ecological succession and how this also happens in ecosystems. Do you want to describe that real quick?
Oh, sure. Yeah, one of the basic rules that, okay, now let's start with a warning here. There are people in the life sciences who insist on that the concept of ecological succession is irrelevant and invalid because I think they've thought through the consequences. In fact, it's one of the basic principles of ecology that ecosystems will tend to go through this pattern. We see it in all kinds of different life forms. The classic example is you have let's say you have a vacant lot. Okay, we had a vacant lot. The builders went and cleared everything, and then they went bankrupt. 2008 comes to mind here. Okay, what happens to that vacant lot? First of all, weeds start growing up. What do we mean by weeds? Weeds are plants that are opportunist. They function where there's a lot of unused resources. They burn through the resources in a hurry, and then they're squeezed out, typically by grass. Things like crabgrass and so on, not your lawn grasses. And then, which use the resources a little more efficiently, and are a little slower, a little less opportunistic, and last for longer. And then those are squeezed out by shrubs. And then those are squeezed out by the first generation of trees, and then those are eventually, through several cycles, you get to the point where you've got a climax forest again, if it was a forest region or what have you. So basically what happens in any situation where you have a sudden abundance of resources is you go through this process where it starts out with reckless, careless, short-term exploitation, weeds, and goes through progressively more efficient, more slow, more patient, more stable forms, until eventually you get to the climax community, which lasts until the next batch of builders come along and bulldoze the place again. This is also what happens with societies. You can watch this in many archaeological contexts where a society will come in, like some tribal peoples when they reached the New World. A lot of big, tasty animals got killed in a hurry. And then they ran out of big, tasty animals and had to regroup. Societies collapsed, new societies were founded. Eventually, you get to the historic Native American peoples who were incredibly efficient in their use of natural resources. They learned that, over 20, 30,000 years of human experience. The same thing is what's going on right now. We broke into this immensely concentrated, immensely rich body of resources called Earth's carbon reserves, the coal, the oil, the natural gas. We busted into it, figured out how to exploit most of it, ran through it in a blinding rush, wasted the vast majority of it. And so the weed that we call industrial civilization has basically run out of cheap, easily attainable nutrients. So what happens now? It gets replaced by slower, more efficient, less extravagant ways of doing things. That's the transition we're in right now.
Yeah, this leads, I think, to another question. Oftentimes I think people have this binary view of either it's business as usual or it's imminent doom. And what I think about your work is that, I feel like you're very nuanced about what our lives are actually going to look like, in the next few decades. And there's this kind of, what I would call a pragmatically hopeful stance if you, if you recognize it and you collapse, and avoid the rush. Of course, nothing's guaranteed. I read your book, Dark Age America, and there's local warlords, and we're all kind of subject to the contingencies of history. But there seems to be a place for Doomer optimism, for pragmatic hope in your vision.
Very much so. Very much so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to? I don't know.
Sure.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, you know what? And I would just add to that, I'm
Go ahead.
thinking about a little piece from your book, just as an example from The Long Descent, because this is the one I grabbed today, thinking about a salvage economy and how people might take alternators. There's 500 million alternators. Take one, add some gears and a chain salvaged from a bicycle and some steel borrowed from an old truck. Spend a week carving and sanding a 5-foot length of spruce into a propeller, and you've got a windmill that will trickle charge a set of scavenged lead acid batteries and run a 12-volt refrigerator. Take it from an old RV. So to me, like, it's a perfect example of like the material way in which, you know, we might be doing some experimentation, and people already are, but you know, I think
exactly. Now, one thing I want to say about that specific example first is that this is not a theoretical example. I did this in college. I was one of a group of people. We had this little hippie farm just south of campus called the Outback Farm, and that's where I learned organic gardening and a number of other things. It was a marvelous experience. Those of us who were living on the farm, we had no central heat, we had no running water, we had no electricity, we had none of the things that most people think are essential for life. We were fine. It worked entirely well. It's one of those things. It's really useful to do that so you can realize just how much of what passes for ordinary industrial lifestyle is luxury, not necessity. Now, we wanted some power for the chicken coop. We had a chicken coop. Hippie farms generally did. We wanted power for the chicken coop, and so one of the people who was involved with the project had the necessary background in engineering, drew up some plans. We got an old truck alternator, free. We got some metal. We got some wood. We did all these various things. We put up this little windmill, and up on top of a pole, and there it was going whoopity 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 whoopity, turning out a steady trickle charge of 12 volt, which we used to power a light bulb. Which the hens really appreciated. They liked having light in the daytime, so it made them happier in the wintertime. But yeah, so the thing is, this kind of thing, it isn't just a theoretical possibility. Back in the 1970s and the very early 1980s, during the heyday of the appropriate technology movement, this kind of thing was all over the place. Then we had the point when most people across the industrial world crumbled and chickened out and decided they were not going to face the future. They were going to pretend that everything was going to be hunky-dory forever. And that all went away in a hurry. That was after Ronald Reagan's after he won his second term with a landslide. And that just dried up and blew away. And some of us still remembered and kept the old books, and most didn't. That's another long, complex story. But the thing is, to revert to the core thing here, the whole fixation about utopia versus apocalypse. Okay, either we're headed to some Star Trek future metastasizing across the galaxy, or we're all going to die next Thursday in a Hollywood spectacular catastrophe. These are the only two futures people are willing to think of, and the reason for that is that those are the futures that are being presented to us by the governing classes of our society. The Star Trek future is what happens if we let them do what they want. The apocalypse is how we're all going to die horribly if we stop them from doing whatever they want. Now, this may seem like a set of very dubious claims to you. It certainly does to me. But that's where it all comes from. It's just, the scientific managerial elite are all saying, no, you've got to let us do this or else we're all going to die, and so on and so forth. It's a crock of crap, to be frank. It's sheer propaganda, but people have internalized it. And so even among those people who reject the technosystem, who reject the whole mindset behind industrial managerial rule, they look at that and they say, oh, that means everyone's going to die next Thursday. That's the better alternative. And it's the only alternative they'll let themselves think of. So breaking out of those set of mental manacles and thinking, okay, how do societies actually decline? What happens when a big sprawling civilization outruns its resource base? We know this. It declines. It doesn't crash overnight. It goes through the same long, ragged process of contraction that we're in right now. Look out the window. And so, yeah, many people are still stuck in that delusion of utopia or oblivion. That was a Bucky Fuller book. And Fuller had some good ideas, but he had a lot of very bad ones, and that's one of the worst. Utopia or oblivion? No, sorry. That we can call it the Bucky Fuller fallacy.
One thing I've been thinking about lately is how kind of material decline, catabolic collapse, is often interpreted by people in kind of wildly different ways, right? There's kind of scapegoat dynamics. There's, people come up with all sorts of reasons why, their lives aren't as good as they used to be. They don't really have to do with the material realities. And this, I can't help but relate this to another question we had from somebody. That do you see the spiritual and magical implications of crypto NFTs, the metaverse? And I'm thinking about this in terms of like just all of the memes, right? And all of kind of like, our headspace and digital reality and all of these just different justifications we have for why things are going the way they are. And maybe you want to, I'm curious about your kind of magical interpretation of how we're, as a society, collectively responding to catabolic collapse.
Okay. The first thing I would point out, there's this great scene in Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses, where one of the prophets, I forget which prophet it is, he's got his followers, he's leading them boldly forward. They come to the sea. And he says, believe in me, trust in me. And he walks out into the ocean. Now this whole crowd follows him. And they vanish beneath the waves. And after a little while, bodies start bobbing up, drowned, And one of the points that, okay, we're about to get into some serious occult philosophy here. Grab your tarot cards and hang on tight.
You can handle it, yeah.
Okay, that's good. One of the basic principles of occult philosophy, it has been phrased, the planes are discrete, not continuous. Discrete, that's D-I-S-C-R-E-T-E, not E-E-T. That doesn't mean that they keep secrets. It means they're separate. The material plane is what it is. The other planes, what's a lot of occultists call the inner planes, each of them is what it is. There are connections between them, but the connections are subtle. Now, you can do a lot of magic. You can do all the magic you want to, and it will not refill an empty oil well. Okay? The material world is governed by its own laws. The inner worlds are governed by their laws. If you know how to work with both, you can sometimes do some very clever things and some very useful things. But that doesn't mean that you can walk into the ocean and expect not to drown. It does not mean that you can step off a 20-story building flapping your arms and rise to heaven. And that's basically what people are thinking. I get this kind of stuff from people all the time. They say, well, you're an occultist. How come you don't think that we can, like magic more oil into the ground and this kind of stuff? And I'm going, to borrow a phrase from a series I don't even like much, oh, you sweet summer child. Magic does not. If magic worked that way, the industrialists would be all over it. You'd have, anybody with any talent would be probably drafted to work in Exxon's Department of Oil remanufacture or something like that. Magic doesn't work that way. Dion Fortune, one of the great 20th century occult writers, defined magic as the art and science of causing change in consciousness in accordance with will. People hear that, they think, oh, you mean psychology? Well, in a certain sense, psychology's been working on this for about 100 years. Magic's about 5,000. We've learned a few tricks. There are things you can do to transform your relationship to the world that can benefit you in very practical ways. But that does not mean that you can make the material world do whatever you want. Again, the planes are discrete. They're not continuous. The material world, the material plane, has its own laws, which have to be followed. You know, and trying to get this through people's heads because we've got this Harry Potter schlock out there. I'm not a fan. In case you had any questions, this Harry Potter schlock, where what Harry Potter and his pals do, is technology. It's not magic. It's zapping stuff and blowing things up and casting these big whammies and all this kind of nonsense. Okay, real magic is subtle. Real magic is much more elegant, and real magic works with the mind side of things, with human intelligence and human consciousness, and with the consciousness of other beings, not all of whom have bodies. So, in terms of classical occult philosophy, the thing that you do when you find you're running out of oil is change your consciousness so you can figure out ways to do without it, because you're not going to be able to magically get back into the ground.
And I think for me, a follow-up is the spiritual dimension, about how do we move forward in collapse with a healthy relationship towards spirituality. I think part of what Jason was asking before is, at least the way I see it is there are a growing number of cults worshiping things in my opinion, like NFTs or cryptocurrency or fusion energy and all this stuff. But then in your book, you were saying about, you were talking a little bit about like the potential for reaffirmation of Christian Catholicism, the old monastic value of poverty. Like they're adjacent to some of our Doomer Optimism circles are Catholics and traditional Catholics who are interested in sort of the Latin Mass and poverty and small scale production.
I know the type. I have a fair number of them commenting on my blogs. So yeah.
So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about the way to approach spirituality and religion collapse, to avoid the cultism.
And thank you for the reminder there. The first thing to keep in mind is that the divine is not a vending machine. You cannot put something into it and get a continuous flow of goodies out. Spirituality is about relationships. And if you treat relationships purely as a matter of what you can get, you're going to find you're going to be without a relationship real fast. And religion is the same way. Spirituality is the same way. There is a lot of talk in all kinds of traditional spiritual documents, the Bible among them, about the worship of money. Jesus called that mammon. And he commented, you can serve God or you can serve mammon, not both. And it's as true now as it was in his time. You can chase profit, you can grovel at the feet of an NFT or something like that, and or can be convinced that the great god cryptocurrency will save us all. Or you can actually develop your spirituality. Don't ever try to do both. Because, cash is trash. Money is just a set of gimmicks for distributing, or shall we say mal-distributing, material wealth. That's all it is. People have very unhealthy emotional attachments to this stuff. And so, there is also, of course, a deeper problem, because I want you to imagine for a moment that you took a bunch of the crypto cultists and gave them all $1 billion each in Bitcoin and dropped them on a desert island with no resources and no water. Okay? How well would they function with that $1 billion of crypto coin each? Probably not very well. They would starve to death, in fact, if they didn't die of thirst first. And money and money analogs such as cryptocurrency are just systems of tokens. They are not real wealth. Real wealth is things like food, drink, shelter, clothing, things that actually meet human needs. And the fixation, the fetishization of money in various ways, and the claim that the love of money is the root of all evil, I think that's exaggerating, but the love of money, the fixation, the obsessive fixation on money is certainly the cause of a lot of them. So one of the first things to do if you're doing an authentic spirituality is to recognize there are entire worlds. It may be necessary for you to have some money, but there are worlds where money means nothing. And while I am not a traditional Catholic, I'm not even a Christian. I was never baptized. I'm an actual unbaptized heathen in a certain sense. It's not my faith, but it's satisfying to many people. And I would like them to grasp the fact that it's satisfying to them doesn't justify ramming it down everyone else's throats. But you can only ask for so much. So there really does need to be a line drawn, a distinction between this fixation on manipulating the material world through money or money analogs on the one hand, and the quest for spiritual richness through interaction, through community, through relationship with the divine, which is a very different thing. And by the way, there are disembodied entities, shall we say, that will happily feed your fixation on money and so on. You don't want anything to do with them. There are every spiritual tradition in the world that I've ever heard of has the concept of demons, aka malign non-physical beings. Do they exist? Well, the universe certainly behaves that way. And if you do a lot of magic focused on selfish and destructive ends, you will find these curious experiences of thoughts that are not your own whispering into your mind, saying, if you just did this. It's ugly. So one of the real problems we face just now is we have a lot of people who are incredibly naive about the spiritual world. Either they think, with the more shallow end of the New Age pool, that once you leave the material world, everything is well-behaved sweetness and light, or they believe that the universe exists to give them goodies. And if they just kind of feed their sense of entitlement enough, the universe will just hand stuff to them. These are really self-defeating ideas, and unfortunately, they're very common, and they are causing, and I think will end up causing, a great deal of destruction and misery.
Maybe let's talk a little bit about green wizardry, how we can kind of bridge this gap of meeting needs, meeting our spiritual needs, and kind of our kind of bare physical needs in a way that is in a way that's not extravagant. It's interesting. A lot of the people in our network are really interested in things like homesteading, and I've seen some of your writing on it that you're a little skeptical, and I think maybe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that kind of the core of your critique is you really need community, right? This notion of self-sufficiency. If that's your notion going into, say, I'm going to be a self-sufficient homesteader, you're fooling yourself. But if you think
you can do it,
you can do it. Like maybe like 1% of 1% of the population.
No, it's very simple. Yeah. As long as you're willing to accept the lifestyle of a medieval peasant, you can do it.
Yeah.
The problem, no, seriously, the problem with trying to be self-sufficient is that most people have no idea how much work it takes for one person or the members of a family to produce enough food for themselves, to say nothing about clothing and their other needs.
Yeah.
Okay? When all you have is that little pool of labor and the natural world, can you survive? Yes. Can you survive in any way that makes sense to 21st century people? No. You can count on a very sparse, spare, limited diet, ample, certainly enough to, if you know what you're doing, which of course many of these people don't. If you know what you're doing, it's enough to keep body and soul together. I think of medieval English peasants who ate a diet consisting largely of bread and what we'd call really thick split pea soup, peas porridge. Those are the mainstays of their diet. Here's your loaf of bread. Here's your bowl of peas porridge. That's your meal. Today, tomorrow, the next day. And once a week you might get some meat. And if you're lucky enough to have a goat, you'll get some milk during some portions of the year. If you're lucky, you own 2 sets of clothing. Other things, your total worldly possessions could probably be, you can load them on your back and walk away with them without too much work, because that's, with that kind of energy pool, that's all you can produce. Now, if you have a community, you can share out some of the labor. It's possible to do concentrated labor. Everybody can pile into planting and everyone can pile into harvest. You can do a lot of work in a hurry, and then you actually have some time in between and over the winter season where you can produce a few luxuries. But the other thing that I would point out is we're not headed to the Dark Age next Thursday. We are in a failing industrial society. Okay, it's failing. It hasn't failed yet. Everyone who is listening to this podcast will be long dead before the decline finishes. That's the thing I keep on trying to get through people's skulls. This is not something that's going to be over soon. So it's actually much more effective at this point to look at ways to leverage the resources that we have in society, to leverage the connections that we can build, the housing stock that we already have, the existing food distribution patterns and so on, so that we can simply begin moving a step at a time into simpler and less ecologically damaging ways of making a living, rather than trying to go whole hog Dark Age right now.
Yeah, that the stair step kind of notion that I've heard you talk about of catabolic collapse, it seems to be conducive to that, because we are going to have shocks depending on where we are. But hopefully most of us, can wake up a little bit and respond to those and rearrange our material conditions and our, relationships to respond to that, right?
Exactly.
To be resilient.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is, right now. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think that it sounds extremely optimistic to me. I mean, the potential in your book, and I know that, I don't know, there's for us, part of the interesting tension is the possibility that arises in collapse, and and how deeply unhappy so many people are in industrial society. Sort of forced somewhere new. And I think thinking about, you have a little part in your book about how the community, not the individual, is the basic unit for human survival. History shows local communities can flourish while empires fall around them. I think that resonates so greatly with the people who we hear from. They want to start in that process of building community, both as individuals building skills, but then connecting with other people who have skills and necessary, local economies and production, that kind of thing. But I think also bringing it back to the spirituality part, there's something in that process that's deeply meaningful too. So I think there's just a lot of optimism there, and I don't know, maybe we want to explore that a bit.
Well, no, I think it's a good point, because the thing is, right now, since we have all these resources, there are things that each of us can do to start making the transition. I mean, right now, especially, we've got a situation. I don't know how many people have noticed this, but the price of oil, that the classic measure of our energy situation, the price of oil is sky high right now. It's broken $90 a barrel. And it's showing no signs of coming back down. You're going to see the gas prices continue to ratchet up. We have all of these situations where, once again, we've got an energy shortage to deal with. We've got these very sharp concerns. We can make changes in our lives right now. That can involve things like making contact with other people who have similar things. Home sharing. People say community, and very often it's, again, this idea of we're going to get together, all this money, we're going to go build a community off in the woods, blah, blah, blah. No. If you want to do some real community building, get a bunch of people together and rent a house together. Okay? Learn how to live together. Learn how to work together. Learn how to insulate the place. And how to get by with a lot less money and a lot less. There's all kinds of possibilities. Right now, we have the media is flailing around talking about this thing called the Great Resignation. And what's happening is that an enormous number of people during the recent shutdowns realize that their jobs absolutely suck and their lives suck.
Yeah.
And they also realized, because their jobs were shut out, they were shut out of their jobs by these lockdowns, and they discovered other ways of making a living. And so now all these big corporations are shrieking like gut-shot banshees because the people they were counting on to come back and work for starvation wages under miserable conditions with constant humiliating meddling by clueless management aren't showing up anymore. They're going, I don't need this. What we have here is an immense opportunity for people to shift into ways of making a living that actually makes sense. Because one factor we have not dealt with in this discussion yet is the extent to which the superstructure of industrial society is parasitic. Okay, take any job you care to name. You've got somebody who actually does the work. You've got a customer who needs the work done. Then you have this immense superstructure of management and capital and money and blah, 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 which is being supported by bleeding off a portion of, usually the great majority, of the money that the customer pays the person who actually does the work. Now, what's happening in the Great Resignation is that an enormous number of people are simply saying, screw this, and they're going to people and saying, yeah, I've got training as a nurse. Let me know when somebody in the neighborhood needs nursing care, and we can handle it cash. So it doesn't support these vast, gargantuan structure. It's just two people engaging in an honest exchange. That's the wave of the future. And a lot of things are going to have to change before that really completes its process. Right now, of course, real estate has become a complete racket. And again, the frantic attempt to bleed everyone dry by raising rents and raising housing prices to insane levels. And how that's going to pop, I don't know, but it will. And there are all of these various factors at work moving toward a sharp simplification of society, which is going to leave a lot more options for individuals to interact as individuals with buyers and sellers, with people who want things they can do, people who can do things they want, etc. There's a lot of possibility there, and a lot of optimism, and all of that also ties into this whole green wizardry thing.
Yeah, a term that comes to my mind is informal economies, and this might lead into there's a lot of people out there who are thinking about who want to build like an eco village or a planned community, and something and we entertain those ideas, but what we really try and emphasize is that much of this is going to be informal. It's going to be organic. It's going to like just go meet your neighbors, like develop patterns of functional interdependence with them.
And you had an essay that went around, made the rounds on Doomer Optimism Twitter, critiquing intentional communities, and it really resonated. I think it was very angry in tone, but I think I can imagine, maybe you can talk us through like this experience you have over years of seeing these people with big ideas and do these intentional communities and have them fail over and over again. I think it's just like
it's not even just in my lifetime. The first great wave of intentional communities in North America happened in the 1820s.
Right.
Go pick up Nathaniel Hawthorne, way back there in the early phases of American literature. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote this great novel, I highly recommend it, called The Blithedale Romance, and it's set on a commune in rural Massachusetts in the 1820s. Okay? Nothing has changed. Not one thing. This is one of the things that is most fascinating about industrial society. If I can insert something here parenthetically, the number of things where people have these failed fantasies stuck sideways in their minds and cannot think around them. Flying cars. The first flying car was built in 1917. It flew. It drove. It was a lousy car and a lousy airplane. Everyone since then has been exactly the same thing. They're vast, overpriced white elephants that don't do either job well, but people have this flying car stuck in their minds and cannot get past it. Intentional communities are exactly the same way. people have this notion, yes, we're going to go out into the country, we're going to found a commune, we're going to transform the world, and they've been doing it since the 1820s. And it never works. And the reasons it never works are all the same. Mostly it's because most of the people who do it are middle class, and they have very exaggerated ideas about what kind of lifestyle you can live on the basis of your own labor. So typically, a community like that either finds some kind of cash cow that it can milk to stay afloat, or goes bust. Most of them go bust. Half of them are gone in less than 2 years. So, and yet people are still stuck in this same fantasy. Or if I could do one thing to all those people out there who are looking for new alternatives for the future, it would be to shake them until they realize, hold it, that's not a new alternative. Intentional communities, they weren't new in the 60s. They weren't new in the 1930s. They weren't new in the 1880s. They're certainly not new now. So how about we try something different? How about we actually try something new instead of the same old, failed, delusion? So,
and I think just to add on to that, a lot of us are really critical of this utopianism.
I'm glad to hear that.
And out of collapse comes, we'll be saved, everything will be perfect.
No.
We'll just make a cooperative X, Y, and Z, but then it just ends up failing. But there's a big man who takes advantage of the situation, kind of thing. It's over and over again. So I think part of us, what we're interested in are like the lessons of these experiments from the past, from history, even from the recent past, and some practical and actionable ways forward. Jason, you had a follow-up, I think.
Yeah, well, I'd like to get more in detail of some of the things you talk about in the Green Wizardry book, about kind of what we can do to, help feed ourselves, warm ourselves, that don't rely on these kind of, highly technological fixes. If you were to give, say, for our audience, 5 things that, somebody can do, right now to start, tinkering.
Easy. The first thing to do is figuring out how to waste less energy. Just flat out. Back in the 1970s, it was found that most people could cut their energy use by 25% easy without actually impacting their lifestyle at all. All it took was a little extra insulation, maybe some insulated window coverings, a few repairs to the faucet, little things like this. Foam gaskets, behind the electrical outlets on exterior walls, little stuff like this. You can cut your energy wastage. That's going to benefit you hugely when the cost of energy ratchets upwards. Okay, so learn to waste less energy. Learn about things about insulation and so on. That's number 1. Number 2, start growing a little of your own food. Now, that's again. A little. You don't have to grow all of it. In fact, you probably don't want to try to grow all of it unless you live out. You already live out in a rural area with 100 acres or so. You don't need to. The bulk products, the grains, beans, things like this, those are easy to come by. Those are very efficiently produced in large amounts. What you need are the things that have the compact vitamins and minerals, things like that. So if all you can do is grow a couple of window boxes, then you're growing something. You're learning the skills. You're picking up the skills of home gardening, which is crucial. So grow a little of your own food. Seriously assess your transportation use. Do you really need to live all that distance from your job? Do you, assuming you still have one? Do you really want a commuter lifestyle? Do you maybe want to change jobs to work or change where you live so you're actually within walking range? Do you want to try changing some other things in your life so you don't have to be dependent on technological transport? Now, the moment I suggest that, the thing that comes to mind, especially in middle-class people, is, well, I don't want people to think that I'm poor. Middle-class Americans are terrified of one thing above all else. They are terrified that people will think they have less money than they do. You're going to have to face that fear. You are actually much poorer than you think, because most of the money you think you have is, twinkle dust and illusions to start with. But you're going to have to face that. But yeah, learn to walk a little more. Another thing you can do, start taking more control over your own health care. Obviously, nowadays, that's even more important than usual, because the healthcare system is in deep trouble. But if you can learn some old-fashioned home remedies, if you can learn maybe a method of alternative health care that works for you, if you can start taking care of your ordinary, everyday health issues, not by running to the store, much less by running to a doctor, but by going, oh yeah, I know how to deal with this, and using some kind of simple home remedy that will do just as well, in many cases better, and have far fewer side effects. That's a very important one. And the fifth one is put more time into your inner life, okay? Many people these days, they basically don't have an inner life. Their minds have been colonized by a television tube. Everything that's in there is being put in there by corporate mass media. The single most useful thing anybody can do right now, and I know this isn't popular to say, but it's true, take your television, unplug it, walk to the nearest dumpster, and pitch it in. If you can drop it off a fire escape or something so it blows it, so the picture tube blows. I suppose few places have picture tubes these days, few televisions, but just tip it in the dumpster. By getting rid of your television, you're suddenly going to have 4 more hours a day, on average, of time that you can actually have a life with. You're also not basically throwing open your mind to a bunch of corporate media types who are going to fill it with what they want. I mean, there's a reason they call what's on television programming, And so decolonize your mind, which means get the media out of it. Go on a media fast. We were talking about Catholics a little while ago. I know a whole bunch of Catholic and Orthodox people who are, one of the things they're doing for Lent is giving up on media. They're doing a media fast for the 40 days of Lent. I think it's a wonderful idea. They're basically spending the time building their own inner lives, building their relationship with their God. It's wonderful. But generally, build your own inner life, spend time using your own imagination, not, just lapping crap off somebody else's plate. And so, just be yourself, and not like the all the people in the life of Brian, the Monty Python. It's like, where he goes, "You are all individuals," and they'll shout back in perfect unison, "Yes, we are all individuals." That's today's America. That's today's America. Everyone wants to be individual, just like everyone else, and they do it by copying all the crap out of the mass media. No, turn off the tube, throw it away. Read books by people who are dead. Try doing something else with your mind. So those are 5 things that I would encourage anybody, and really anybody can do those things.
Yeah.
If you happen to own a house, if you happen to have access to certain lots of other things you can do. But let's start with those 5. Use less, just as I said.
Yeah, those are great. I think on the last one, the analog for us that we need to be wary of is, so we're both Ashley and I are on Twitter a lot, and it's great for some things, like connecting with other Doomer Optimists and sharing tips and tricks about how to raise chickens or grow vegetables, but it is addicting, and we are aware of that.
It is, and it's designed to be. It's designed to be addicting, and I'm going to suggest the possibility either that you consider setting up a forum, a private forum with no advertising, to handle such conversations on the one hand, or that you consider going to the Green Wizards forum. I don't remember the URL right off, but if you look for Green Wizards, you'll find it promptly, which was set up by some readers of mine, and that's what it does. Yeah. It serves as a place to talk about chickens and insulation and stuff you do. So get out of the big corporations. If you're gonna stay online, extract yourself from these deliberately addictive corporate structures. Create structures of your own. It's the equivalent of building a place out in the countryside, except it's a lot cheaper.
Something comes to mind when you said that. I really love this example of the Odd Fellows. In your book, and it's basically like a civil society that in which people, let's see, in 1819, originally founded in Britain, but there was an American version of it. People paid roughly the equivalent of $20 a week, and the money went into a common fund. When a member was in good standing but became too sick to work, they received regular sick pay, visits from a physician, funeral costs by the lodge. This sort of, I guess, loose voluntary association thing is something that's, I think, increasingly interesting to the people here who are thinking about building community. You know, I think
I am delighted to hear that. Now, here's the first thing to keep in mind: the Oddfellows still exist. If your community has been around for a while, it may have an Oddfellows Lodge in it.
Right, or the Grange.
The Grange. Now, full disclosure here, I have been active. I'm not currently active, although I'm still, I was not thrown out or anything. I'm still on the books. But the Oddfellow, I'm a member of the Oddfellows, the Grange, and the Masons. I've done this stuff. It is worth doing. In rural areas, especially, the Grange used to be the absolute heart and soul of rural community. And if you happen to be in a farming area or a former farming area that still has a Grange, join that puppy. Thing number one, you will meet a bunch of elderly people who know more about gardening than you ever will. You think you can't learn from them? Think again. You also, it's a little late now to meet people who made it through the Great Depression. When I originally joined the Grange, we had a number of members who were young, who were kids during the Great Depression. And did they have stories about how to save money? But these days, you can meet people who made it through the severe rural agricultural oppressions of the 1970s and 1980s, and they can help you out. Get your months down to the Grange. The Oddfellows, they tend to be more urban, but again, they no longer have the sick pay thing and so on, because that was taken over by the governments. But the concept is still there. And crucially, if you want to know how to run an organization that's of a diverse lot of people who all have to work together, the old-fashioned fraternal lodges like the Oddfellows and the Grange, they will teach you how to do it. They do it by democracy, not consensus. Consensus is the best way to waste time ever known to man. Seriously, it's a complete disaster. Well, we can get into that if you want to, but at any rate, they could teach you classic democratic process, how to form committees, how to make decisions promptly and efficiently, how to make sure all sides get their say, how to reach an informal consensus if that's possible, and if not, get a decision made. You can learn an enormous amount, and the rituals are really neat. I was talking about developing our inner lives. So many of us don't have that kind of ritual aspect to our lives. We're not used to symbol and ceremony anymore. The Oddfellows and the Grange can help you through that. They have plenty to teach.
I love that. I just can imagine a new wave of young people repopulating these organizations and relearning ritual and connection and actually building out alternative institutions. I think the tendency of young people is always to let's make something new, let's reinvent the wheel. And I just think how cool would it be for young-ish people to reinvigorate already existing institutions like this.
Let me turn that around. Do you happen to know if there's an Oddfellows Lodge or a Grange in your community? Where you live right now?
Jason or Stephen
I
can
don't,
answer.
I don't know.
I
I
moved my
don't
family to
know.
Uruguay, so I can't answer that question, but maybe
Okay.
Jason or
Yeah,
Stephen.
I'm in Northwest North Carolina in the Appalachians, and there should be. So I'm gonna.
Oh, oh, good heavens, yes. My guess is you could probably find granges, you could probably find Oddfellows lodges, you could certainly find Masonic lodges, you may be able to find various other lodges. There were something like 3,500 different fraternal orders, not individual lodges, but different orders in America in 1900. Most of them have gone out of existence, but by no means all. Look around, see what you can find.
Yeah, we've got a couple granges in Colorado where I am, and there is an International Order of Oddfellows in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh yeah,
nearby.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
I know.
And oh, sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, I was just to say, I know someone younger than me who, if I don't know, 5 years ago or so, he had joined in part for the community aspect. He's a member of the Integral, or what was the Integral community in Boulder, and he was part of trying to get a bunch of people to reinvigorate that, because there's a big gap. There's all the old ones dying off.
Well, let me encourage those of you who are within reach, and all of our listeners who are within reach. Find out what there is in your community in terms of the old lodge orders, and seriously consider going down and joining one. You'll be putting in 1 or 2 evenings a month, and dues are typically very modest. You're going to learn an enormous amount, and it will give you connections that you can use on a much broader scale than you have ever imagined. So give it a try. The thing is, there are the most amazing odd little groups exist in this sort. There are ethnic lodges like the Sons of Norway. There are all kinds of little organizations out there that have this basic lodge structure. Most of them are extremely eager for new members. They would love to hear from you and teach you everything you want to know about them. And it's a simple investment, and it's especially if we do get lots of young people moving into these things, they can be reinvigorated. They can become what they once were: centers of community, frameworks for community resilience, and possibly the basis for restructuring society as things come unraveled.
Yeah. Speaking of that, so I recently read your book Retrotopia, which I really, really liked.
I'm glad to hear that. That was a fun book to write.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. It was definitely very different than Dark Age America. Similar subject matter, but very different. And I'm wondering if you see prospects or like regional prospects of, like, where do you see the most potential for Retrotopia? Is it the Great Lakes region where you said it there, or is it? And it might not be in the United States. It might be in other parts of the world. I guess if people are thinking about, where do they have the best chance of landing in a future Retrotopia, is that even worth speculating on?
Well, first of all, we don't know.
Yeah.
Second of all, the best place to be is the place where you already have connections in the community. Third, if you want Retrotopia to be a possibility, start building it. Don't wait for someone else to make it for you. Look at the possibilities for a different way of living. Look at the possibilities, if Retrotopia specifically turns your crank, for downshifting to a lower technological tier. What would it take to get rid of this? What would it take to let go of that? How would it work to live a simpler lifestyle? Not a drastically simpler. Again, we don't have to head for the Stone Age next week, but that's one of the things I wove into Retrotopia. People are, downshifting to like a 1950s lifestyle. A 1950s lifestyle is like 20% of current electricity use. It's much lower energy. And, if you want to go further back to the 1920s, people in the 1920s did not live in caves. I know this will probably come as a surprise to any of our progress fiends out there, but there are a lot of technological stages between complete collapse and the latest gizmo-centric gosh wow fantasy Tomorrowland. And many of them are frankly much nicer places to live. This is why you've got people these days who are literally shifting gears back to earlier technological suites and saying, no, I'm going to use this instead. It works better.
Yeah.
So don't wait for someone else, and don't look for the play. It's like Ernest Thompson Seton, who did some marvelous youth groups about 100 years ago. He used to say the basic rule is where you are with what you have right now.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what the situation is, where you are with what you have right now, get to work. Retrotopia will come into existence if you choose to build it.
Hmm. Do you want to describe the multi-tiers? You mentioned tiers, and in the book,
Oh
you
yeah,
have
that's
5 tiers.
yeah. It's a gimmick. It's a gimmick that I used in Retrotopia to try to get people to think about the idea of downshifting their technology. The idea is that in Retrotopia, each county votes on which technological tier it's going to be in. I'm going to try to get these things right. There's the 1850. No, there's the 1950, the 1920, the 1890, and the 1890, and then 1860, I think, or 1850 was one. But there were, and the highest tier 5, was immediate pre-internet. And so it was a matter of each county would vote on which one of those tiers, and would do a popular vote as to which one of those tiers they were going to have, and that determined what kind of property taxes you were going to pay. Because if you wanted that technological infrastructure, if you wanted the roads that cars can drive on, if you want these various other things, you get to pay for them out of your own property taxes, rather than borrowing the money and pushing it off on the future, And so different counties would, one county would go for a 1950s lifestyle, and you'd be going through there, and you'd be seeing, and not 1950s lifestyle in any kind of legal sense. How dare you have bell bottoms? You have to wear a suit and tie. No, it's just what's the basic technology level. And so, the next one over might have gone for the 1880s, and they have canal boats. Of course, all of Retrotopia has canal boats. That's a very efficient technology. But you see horse-drawn wagons going along the roads, and you see you don't see electric wires going loop-de-loop-de-loop from power poles across the landscape, because they're not in an electric tier. They chose it themselves. The lower tier you go, the lower your taxes get. The higher tier you go, the higher the taxes you get. You pay for what you want, and if you're not satisfied, of course, you can sell out and go to another county that has a different tier. And so, but it was a way. I'm not, as with so much in Retrotopia, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. It is a utopian story. The point was to get people thinking about, okay, how much technology do I actually need? How much technology do I actually want? How much technology am I actually willing to pay for out of my own pocket?
So I'm curious, JMG, kind of on this theme of people looking for what level of technology they want to live at.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and actually, there's 2 questions. I'm speaking now in the second of it. But what was your motivation for moving to Rhode Island? I don't remember exactly where you lived before, but I'm wondering, was that part of kind of looking to position yourself for this descent?
Yes, it was. Actually, my wife and I have done a lot of moving, which is not something I really had in mind. We were in Seattle for many years. I grew up in the South Seattle suburbs. We settled in Seattle when we first got married back in 1984, and we lived there until what was it, 2004. And it became very clear at that point that Seattle was going to be hopelessly unsustainable, even in the short term. It was becoming horribly polluted. It was becoming a dirty, everything pleasant about Seattle had been destroyed at that point. And the Seattle city government could see nothing wrong with it, because as far as they were concerned, housing prices were rising, so everything was fine. And so it was turning into Los Angeles North, so we left. We spent 5 years in a little town in far southern Oregon, Ashland, Oregon, and just as partly that was the first option we had. That was the place that looked like an option first. We lived there. We realized what some of the problems were on that whole side of the country. Then we moved most of the way across the country to a little town in the north central Appalachians, Cumberland, Maryland, and we lived there for 8 years. And probably would still be there, except because my wife's health is not good, And in particular, she has some issues with diet. She is allergic to a lot of things. And so we have to be able to get certain specialty foods, and it was becoming increasingly hard to get those in a little town in the north central Appalachians. Transport was becoming problematic, and at that time I needed to get out so that I could do speaking tours and things like that. We looked into various options and ended up moving to Rhode Island as a place where we would have more access to the resources she needs, better transportation, some other options. And so we settled in a very pleasant working class neighborhood in East Providence, where we are still located and are hoping not to have to move again.
Thanks. In setting up the meeting with you, I had to laugh in an email I sent to Jason and Ashley. I picture you sitting on an old PC MS-DOS computer and using AOL over dial-up to access the internet through email.
Now, I've used dial-up, I'll have you know. I never got caught into AOL. That's thank heavens.
The point of that is
my first computer was a Sanyo MBC 550, which had 2 5.25 floppy disks and no hard drive. It was a lovely little machine for what it would do. And so, no, these days I use we have respectable internet service, and but my compromise with the technology is that I get all my computers used. I keep and they're all old. They are all well back behind the current state of the art technology. I get them mostly for free. People want to get rid of them, so I keep them out of the waste stream.
We have one audience question I want to read to you.
Hello, audience.
Yeah, so here, 2 people asked a similar question. Would be curious how he sees the demographic trend towards greater and greater weight of elderly people fitting into his vision of the future and its possibilities. And someone echoed basically the conflict between rapid population aging and the concept of returning to manual production on the land. A lot of people are pretty interested in digging into these demographic and material questions as to what to expect, like what is our society going to look like. So some thoughts about that population.
Okay. So the thing to keep in mind is that behind this demographic, behind the current demographic, the overhang of old people and so on, is a very simple fact. Global population growth is peaking and is moving very rapidly toward the beginning of a prolonged decline. In most of the world at this point, population growth has peaked and gone negative. Africa is the only continent in the world that still has positive population growth, and we'll see how long that lasts. They're saying that it's going to keep on growing for the indefinite future, but 10 years ago they were saying that of Latin America, and Latin American population growth has dropped off a cliff. The same is true of the Middle East, which was another place they were saying, population growth will continue there through 2115. Nope, it's already in contraction. The world is overcrowded. We've got 8 billion people on a planet that can support about 2 billion. So the demographic shifts we are talking about are part of the normal process by which population peaks and declines, and it's likely to decline fairly quickly. We've already had one pandemic. There will doubtless be others. And yeah, there's a substantial overhang of elderly people. Now, this does not mean that we're going to have millions and millions of retirees sitting on the beach while a handful of working age people work for them. Retirement was a temporary phenomenon made possible by the age of oil. Okay? Before then, people didn't retire unless they were too sick to work, and then either they found someone to take care of them or they didn't do too well. We will be moving into a similar situation. We're already moving into that situation now. You see a lot of elderly people who have to work, and because retirement is not an option for a growing number of people. So one of the things that will definitely change as we proceed is that the entire concept of automatic retirement is going to go away. And another aspect is that we're going to have to get used to a contracting society. Nobody has really grasped this yet. What it means when the amount of real estate we have is too much for the population.
Mm.
Okay, everyone's used to the idea that real estate prices should keep on going up. You buy a house at 100,000, you should sell it at 200,000. Imagine what you're going to do when, due to supply and demand, you buy a house for 100,000. You better hope you can get 50,000 out of it when you finally move in. That's the world of contraction. That's the world we're heading into. And so demographic contraction is happening. It is accelerating. The current pandemic has really, not even so much the disease itself, but the amount of social isolation and the disruption of the economy and so on. You're going to see a baby bust on the grand scale over the years immediately ahead. And so as that accelerates, we're moving into unparalleled territory, certainly unparalleled in recent times. Go back and read some books on the latter centuries of the Roman Empire. They were in the same situation. Population was contracting steadily, and you ended up. I mean, I'm thinking of one Roman city where, in the transition toward the Dark Ages, everyone just up and moved into the old Colosseum and built their own little kind of micro city there, because there weren't enough people left to keep up the city. So that's what we're looking at over the broad term. We're looking at a situation where abandoned houses, suburbs where nobody lives anymore, scenes like you'll find in Detroit right now, where they have, 10% of the population they had in the boom days?
Right.
But that's normal. That's what that's what the world looks like, where there are more old people than young people, generation after generation after generation.
Yeah, this brings to mind, our region, kind of the Southern Appalachia bioregion, is known for the Foxfire Series, where a bunch of high school students went out and found old timers who are still living, according to old ways, to learn their ways and document them.
I'm very familiar with the series. I love those books.
Yeah, I feel like it's a great resource, and it's a great resource for where I live. And for anybody anywhere, but these were old timers who were still very capable. They still knew how to take care of themselves even in their 80s, 90s, and it was hopeful that these young kids were wanting to learn, and I hope that happens again, right? I hope that the younger generation, as you're saying, seeks out these old timers, maybe through these Grange halls and
definitely go to your local Oddfellows and Grange Hall. You'll find the old timers. Yeah. I mean, it is a very different way to experience life when the guy sitting next to you in the lodge can't walk very well because he suffered frostbite winning a medal fighting the Germans in the Battle of the Bulge. That's sad. I've done that. I've had that experience. So yeah, it's definitely a different way to look at life. So yeah, I hope that happens too. Unfortunately, we also have a lot of old people who do not necessarily know a lot of useful skills, and who have a rather overinflated sense of entitlement. And I'm afraid they may have a very rough time dealing with the way things work out over the years to come. But we'll see.
Yeah, I can think of, one kind of source of trade is, younger folks providing some of the labor and the help, for the old timers in exchange for the wisdom. And this is how it's always been until the last 100 years or so.
Yeah, that's a normal way things operate. Yeah. That's why people took in apprentices, for heaven's sakes. Yeah. And and very often, the farm would have a bunch of various young people coming in who would be working at the farm. They'd be fed along with the family. They'd basically and they would learn the craft of farming from older, experienced farmers, providing some muscle. And we need to get back to that. I would encourage any of our listeners who are old or getting on for old to start thinking about what do they actually have to offer? What do they know? Or what can they learn in a hurry? Now, if, it used to be, among other things, that it also happened that a younger family would take in an older relative who would help with childcare and do some other things like that, and again, contribute to the family. But it's all going to be a matter of contributing. It's not going to be a matter of just sitting back on the beach and, and enjoying your retirement. That is fading in the rearview mirror right now.
Yeah. Well, JMG, I think we're going to wrap up soon, but I wanted to give the opportunity if there's any question that you would have liked us to ask, or you just wish somebody would ask you. Is there a question
is,
that, and do you want to?
The thing is, you hit the crucial points. Above all else, what can you do, and why isn't it a matter of apocalypse or progress or apocalypse? We got if I could get those 2 points made into the business end of a branding iron, and brutally burn them into the buttocks of every young person in North America, I would do it, because the sooner you start thinking, okay, what can I actually do? Because we're not facing apocalypse. We're just facing a long, slow, ragged decline like the one we've been in for the last, 50 years. If people grasp that, then it's time to get optimistic, because at that point the possibilities for constructive change are immense.
I love that. I mean, we could not end on any more Doomer Optimist note. So on that note, JMG, thank you so much. This was I mean, you're basically saying everything that have been saying over the past year of doing this project. So
I am delighted to hear that, and thank you very much for having me.